Buenas noches. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos en esta última charla de este día de conversaciones de Zona Maco. Nos acompañan Bryan Barcena, editor de Artforum International de la Costa Oeste, Helena Lugo, directora ejecutiva de Terremoto, y Benjamin Sutton, editor en jefe de The Art Newspaper América. La charla va a ser en inglés. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Thank you for being here. Y
Gracias.
Les digo, la charla va a ser en inglés, pero si después tienen preguntas en español, podemos trasladar y traducir y ya hacemos la forma. Okay. Thank you all for being here on a very busy week in a very loud room. As I said, my name is Bryan Barcena. I'm the West Coast editor of Artforum. And I'm here with Helena, the director of Terremoto, and Benjamin Sutton from the Art Newspaper. But I wanted to just say thank you for being here, and that Helena and I had this idea a few months ago to sort of organize a panel here to talk a little bit about what we do, but kind of what we do in relationship to the area and how we cover and how to think about writing about Latin America. So the format for today is that we have a few questions that we're going to ask ourselves, and hopefully answer those questions succinctly. And yeah, with that, do you have anything you want to add?
No, sounds great.
Okay.
Should I start? Okay, so yeah, also the intention was to try to be a little bit honest about our practices and to be a little bit vulnerable in the way of like also being critical towards how critique and magazines and publications are produced within the continent. So first we will introduce our magazines, our projects, and what our role in them. So again, my name is Helena Lugo, and I'm a executive director of Terremoto magazine. Terremoto is a platform for curatorial and artistic practices in the Americas and the Caribbean. Right now we have two main projects: a residency program that we launched 3 years ago that I really invite you to know more about. And then we have our magazine, which basically Terremoto, what is famous for. We did a print version of the magazine during 6 years. And for the last 3 years, we became just online. But I think the most important thing about Terremoto is that we have always devoted to give visibility to Latin American practices, to Caribbean practices, and we have always positioned ourselves from a point of view regarding the colonial practices, anti-patriarchal practices, and anti-racist practices, terms that are more common nowadays, but that have defined Terremoto since 2013.
So I'm the West Coast editor of Artforum, and for those of you who don't know what Artforum is, we're sort of a critical art magazine that has existed since the 1967. We cover the entirety of the globe as well as we can, not as well as we should, but perhaps as well as we can. We commission features, columns, reviews, in addition to video content on the web. We, have about 50,000 subscribers to the physical print magazine. We do about 10 a year, and we have a much larger presence online. We are a group of 8 editors that most of whom are in New York. I am the West Coast editor, so I'm the only person located in California. I live in Los Angeles. And my official territory spread is from Seattle to San Diego, but I also contribute to coverage here in Latin America. What else should I say about our forum? And we have editors in London and in Berlin who cover Asia, Africa, the Middle East, in a variety of ways, which we'll talk about in a bit.
My name is Benjamin Sutton. I am the editor for the Americas of the Art Newspaper. The Art Newspaper is a newspaper. We put out 11 issues, print issues a year. We also do daily editions. So there's actually one here, a bilingual English-Spanish edition here at the fair. We do similar things for Art Basel fairs and Frieze. And then we also have a strong presence online. So we have daily website coverage. Our coverage is very news focused. So sort of unlike Artforum, although Artforum does do news coverage as well, we're really news forward. So it's, how contemporary politics are impacting the world of arts funding and visual culture, sort of drama within the art market, galleries closing, collectors suing auction houses, auction sales. It's very sort of, we sort of think of ourselves as like a trade newspaper, essentially, for the art world. And we do also publish reviews, but that's like a very, very small portion of what we do. I run our New York office. We have 6 employees in New York. The bulk of our operation is in London, where we have about 15 to 20 employees. And then we also have a Paris office that produces a French language version of the newspaper. And then we have correspondents kind of all over the world. So I am in charge of the Americas, North and South America, and the Caribbean. And then we have an editor in Shanghai who's sort of in charge of coordinating our Asian coverage. And then our main office in London kind of handles the rest of the world, as they call it, problematically. So that's us.
So maybe the first question that something probably you didn't mention, but like to put a little bit more in context, like what's the relationship you have with the Americas and with Latin American art within your magazines? In Terremoto is pretty clear, since that's the only thing we do, but you probably want to expand on that.
Yeah. I think, to lead on what Benjamin was saying, we don't really do arts journalism. We're not a magazine that really is looking to cover everything, that is able to cover everything. What we're really looking to do is kind of build a community of writers, of critics, of academics, of curators, right, across the globe who can serve as people who are on the ground in all these countries. Obviously, there's only 8 editors who can kind of inform us. Me personally, I grew up in Latin America. I grew up here in Mexico City, and my parents are Cuban. I've always had an affinity with Latin America. I travel to Latin America very often on behalf of the magazine to serve as an ambassador. But that doesn't mean that, where I go is where the coverage is. We have writers, in Argentina, Brazil, Costa Rica, obviously Mexico here too. And we're really, as much as the editors are commissioning, really looking for them to tell us what is worth seeing, what is worth covering, what kind of writing is needed in whatever country it might be, whether it be, a small community of artists or a larger community of artists like here in Mexico City. So it's really, we as editors are really trying to be kind of air traffic control and not deciding so much as rather being open and kind of being a radio tower, hoping that people will tell us what is really pertinent and what is really urgent and how it relates, and try not to sort of like impose our will upon places that we are not, right? I think that's a kind of very important idea that we try to run with, is that we are 8 editors, but there's 100 writers or 150 writers that we call on rather.
I would say for the Art Newspaper, it's somewhat similar. We have a very small team. I'm in charge of the Americas from New York. So the US, for better and for worse, takes up a lot of my energy. The New York art world is enormous. There's things happening constantly, and that's really our home turf. So we feel an obligation to cover that. That being said, we have a huge network of writers, both within the US and abroad. So we actually have like a half dozen fairly regular contributors here in Mexico City. We have writers in Buenos Aires, in Sao Paulo, in Rio. And we have quite a few writers who are from Latin America, but now live in the US, who kind of cover their home countries. So we have a writer from Caracas who now lives in Miami, who writes about Venezuela. Similar to what Bryan was saying, we have a very limited, like our actual team has a very limited purview just because we are so few and there's so much happening. But we really rely on our writers, both here in Mexico City and elsewhere, to kind of tell us what matters and tell us what the shows are that we need to be writing about. Tell us when something scandalous happens, if there's an important new museum opening, things like that. We really kind of rely on our experts on the ground.
Yeah, I think that that's something that we have in common as well. Like Terremoto's team is rather small. We have one editor-in-chief, Dani Valencia Sepúlveda, who's in charge of commissioning, inviting. But the actual network of Terremoto is comprised of more than 500 writers that are all over the world, and it's a pretty huge network of people thinking, so we have as well like different voices. In that sense, I'd like to delve into probably which kind of formats do we publish, and maybe we can go on with that. So in Terremoto we have a section called opinion, in which we try to commission critical essays regarding topics such as cultural infrastructure in the continent, gentrification, conditions of precariousness within the art world. Like, we try to be very critical about within this section. We also have a section of articles in which we publish reviews, which, I mean, reviews are this sort of ugly duck of the art world. Like, nobody likes reviews, but you need them somehow. Yeah, exactly. Until you get
anybody wants to write.
Nobody wants to do a review. Nobody knows how to write a review anymore. Like, I think we're in a very bad time for reviews, but also is what museums would like to hear, but I don't know. But in Terremoto, we also have two other formats that I think are interesting, that are kind of different from just editorial work. So we have a section called Marginalia, in which we commission an artist or a curator to do a selection of images, some sort of visual essay, and write a text about them. We also have a section called Projector, in which we publish the video of an artist working with that media, and we write a text about it. These videos are just for 1 month during our webpage, so it's like a limited time for you to see them. And yeah, we also have, of course, the editorial core of the magazine, which is our editorial letter. We publish it every 4 months, and the editorial letter proposes a topic, and after this topic we make 12 commissions. That could be either Marginalia, Projector, reviews, or opinions or essays to try to cover a specific topic. For instance, this winter we published Disobedient Memories. And Disobedient Memories is an archive, or like an archipelago of essays in which we are trying to study the archive, but not in an official way, but rather to think of all the things that escape the archive, such as in the chantings, in the gossip, in the gesture. So we're trying to recollect disobedient memories or other formats of creating history that is not linear or official.
Do you want me to play the video?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so there's a little video that I think Helena wanted to share as well that I think will give some insight into this. If I can make it go. Go. ¿Tienes sonido?
No, like you can keep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, Artforum, I'm not going to go into every single kind of content that we commission because it's quite varied. I would categorize it as a kind of, we have sort of print content and we have web content, and very often they're the same, but often web is where we can kind of be more expansive, think about more expansively about the areas we cover and how we cover it. But again, we do, of course, features, which are sort of articles that are about one artist that could be a longer length that are really a critical dive, or on exhibitions or on a historical moment. We do columns that are, let's say, we ask artists or curators what they're watching, what they're listening to. We ask curators, some of the curators who are working who are at the top of their field, about what they feel is happening in their field, or where they think it's going, or how to work with artists. I don't know if that video is going. Okay. Well, I don't know how to make it, but Okay, no.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, anyway, so you can see some of the different kind of formats that we have here and the ways that we've been covering Latin America and frankly the rest of the globe, right? Which is sometimes we have things that are written from the point of view of someone traveling to these countries, traveling to exhibitions, fairs to go see and taking sort of the temperature on the ground, right? Like, what does it feel like here? Who is there? What are the artists saying about what is happening in that place? And that's really the responsibility of the writer to sort of embed themselves in that place and get that information. We have, of course, like 1,000 word reviews or profiles on an artist, on a historical movement, on an event. We have what we call previews. We do that twice a year in the spring and the fall, where we look to the all across the globe to see what are the exhibitions that are going to be most important in a certain place. You can see a Desi Morelos show that will open at MUAC or did open at MUAC. It's open at MUAC now. I don't know. Anyway, so there are those formats that sort of try to cover all the bases in terms of what is happening to artists, what is happening to movements, what is happening to a country. And you can see sort of when we do go to these places, and I often travel and write these, so you can see two of those have been written by me, one of them by Pablo Larios, who is our editor who's located in Berlin. We travel to these places and we try to really ask the questions and think about what does it mean for art that's happening here? What does it mean to talk to the writers that are there? What are they feeling? And to do a sort of review that's a review that kind of is more expansive, that is thinking about a place as much as someone who is traveling to those places for a week or 10 days or even 3 days can think about this. So there are, of course, as we're saying, trying to be a little bit criminal, limitations to these formats, but we do our best to sort of think about how to be responsible, how to be ethical, how to present a place in a light that is on its own terms, right? Not in relation to another country, not in relation to art movements outside of that place, but to really think about it both in a personal way, right? Like these are personal reflections on a event or place, but also in a sort of how does it relate to the community that's here? And that was our, one more thing. We do a year in review and we ask 20 to 25 people, curators, artists, to give what they thought were the best things in the world that year, whether it be music, film, art, architecture. This year, which is probably happening right now, Bad Bunny Super Bowl halftime show. That was the cover of our December issue.
Do love the Artforum top 10s. So great.
They're a pain in the ass to do, so I'm glad you like them.
They're very enjoyable to skim, maybe. So the Art Newspaper, we, like I said, we're very news forward. So these are examples of the two, last year and this year are two bilingual editions for Zona Mako, one of which you can find at the entrance to the fairs. But so we do a lot of our coverage is driven by art world events. So we do a lot of newspapers that are devoted to specific art fairs, specific exhibitions. This spring we'll have a whole magazine devoted to the Venice Biennale when that opens in May in Venice. So a lot of our coverage is looking at a particular art world event from kind of all angles. So for Zona Mako, for instance, we will have an article, a feature about the fair. We'll have writers who are here on the ground sort of tell us like what they think is the most important thing that people coming in from out of town or people who may live here might not know about. Then in our monthly edition, it's also very news driven, but global. So we have, we sort of break things up by section, and it's kind of a mix. Like some of it is very art historical and nerdy. We actually have a column called Diary of an Art Historian, where it's just like this British art historian like geeking out about the latest exhibition he's seen. But then we also have like pretty hefty analysis rooted in current events. Like the cover of our February issue in North America is about the Maduro regime being overthrown by Trump and like just like what a disaster that is, but then also like the implications of that for heritage in Venezuela, which has been kind of like sort of not necessarily the best cared for and like what it means now that the country is sort of stuck in suspended animation. So it's really kind of like taking current events and looking at them through an art lens quite often. In every issue, we have what we call a big review. So we try to review whatever the biggest exhibition we feel is in a given month. I believe the current issue, it's the Monuments exhibition in Los Angeles. And then we sort of break down coverage according to sections. So there's museums and heritage, which is focused on museums and sort of preservation. And then the art market, which is very much about galleries and auction houses. And then online, we have 2 podcasts, weekly podcasts, which are very popular and excellent. One called The Week in Art, where we look at the current events in the art world. And then another, which is called A Brush With, which is a really in-depth, like hour-and-a-half long interview with an artist who has a show coming up. I think those are the main things that we do. Probably forgetting some, but yeah.
I think this, I'll pass it over, but I think this leads to our next point, which is like how to do this responsibly, but also be critical, right? Like to think.
Yeah. I think that's one of the main things that I'd like for us to delve into. Like, for instance, Bryan and I met at the PICE Biennial just like a few months ago. And one of the questions I like to open, because it's a question I also ask myself all the time, is like, sometimes we travel a lot covering events, and these institutions invite us to they are our hosts. They pay for our tickets. They give us the entrance. They give us food. They pay us for the hotel. So for you guys, like, how is this relationship? What's the critical framework you use? Because obviously, how do we navigate the tension between obviously being honest and being critical when we write about something, but also how do we keep and protect these institutional alliances?
I mean, I think the thing that we're tasked with, and I think the responsible thing to do is first and foremost to treat an exhibition like an exhibition. Any exhibition of art, we have to come to with our critical faculties on a sort of even plane, right? And as Helena was saying, when we go to these places, when we have these hosts that are involved with the making of this art and the market and all these things in many myriad ways, first and foremost, we're there to review the exhibition. And something that I do personally when I am invited or when I think I want to review an exhibition is I never agree to coverage, right? I try to enter these with the idea that if I don't have anything incisive to say, or if I don't have anything that is constructive to say about this, I can always back out. And I think that leaves me a little bit of space to feel some level of ethical responsibility to my own process as a writer, right? I think that we, as Helena said, I receive a lot of invitations to, and I don't mean that as like an ego, like I go all over the place and it's so amazing and you wish you had my job. I mean it because it's really they're looking for coverage. Like these institutions are really looking to us to form a sort of opinion about this. And luckily, it continues to be important to create opinions about art, right? Like we're very lucky in that way, although like the finances of it aren't great, that people look to writers, critics, editors to make an opinion about these things. It would be very easy for them to hire a PR company, write a press release, hire someone to write exactly what they wanted, but they don't, right? It's important to the artists, it's important to the curators to have someone coming in with a sort of eye that can be at some level objective, right? Now, I think there's something that Helena points to too, which is when we go to these places that might not have sort of the most developed art economy, who are showing artists that it might be their first biennial or it might be their first exhibition, you don't want to tear them apart. You know, you want to encourage this kind of critical thinking, and that country or that organization who's put the money forth continues to do so. We don't want to make it seem like we go there, trash it, and it wasn't a worthwhile effort, so never do it, right? I think it's important to find something positive, find the artists that are doing good work within any context of coverage, to use a kind of pejorative term, like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think my approach to criticism in general is to never be punching down. Punching up is great. I mean, love taking down a show at Gagosian or something.
That's true.
But yeah, I think to your point, like the power dynamics of the art world in general and like what we do as well are very fraught, and like we are often either put in or putting ourselves in these situations where we're being sort of wined and dined in hopes of achieving positive coverage. And like, I think you just have to be like very mercenary and clear-eyed about like that exchange. Like again, this is not a brag, but like I get invited to on a lot of press trips, and I decline like 95% of them, partly because I have no time, but also because most of them are things that I don't necessarily think that I can engage with in a sort of interesting, critical way. And I would love to, fly to that city and experience that art scene. But if I have to write about this show that, based on the images, looks not great, then I don't want to like get into that relationship. But I do think, to your point, like going into those situations, I'm sort of, before I get there, kind of always trying to think like, okay, if turns out to be a fiasco, like how do I either find a different way of covering it, or, am I in a place where I can say, you don't want me to write this, so I'm not like, no coverage. But it's like it's a very fraught relationship.
One other thing that I just want to say is like, us three sitting here are also people who are paid by our publications, right? Or, for the most part, we're paid by our publications. Whether we go or not, whatever we write, we are going to be continued to be paid by our publications. For a lot of freelance writers, young writers, they sometimes feel that they can't be as critical as they need to be because they won't get another job. They won't get an invitation. And we all know that, or we all, I think it's pretty obvious that being a freelance writer is an incredibly difficult job to make a living from. Almost impossible, I would say. So being critical, and this is not something new, but I think it's more acute now than ever, being critical and saying something negative puts you in danger of not getting another job and not being able to support yourself. And I think that's a really important consideration for institutions to think about too when they're inviting these people, that they have to be open to this and invite them again, even if they wrote something negative.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I think it's a little bit different. I feel that if I am invited somewhere, I feel totally forced to write something about it. I feel it's just like the exchange of courtesy that you're doing with a biennial or any event. So I totally feel compelled to write something after I've been invited to an event, and if we decide to go to an event, it's because we're writing something. Being that said, for instance, like just to also like talk about something very specific, the País Bienale that we recently went, the Guatemala Biennial, I was a pretty weird, like difficult thing for me to write because I wanted to be honest, because I needed to be true to myself, but I also want to get invited in a couple of years. And that's the truth. Because these trips are also like very useful to connect with, other agents in Central America. I got to know you, but last year I got to know the curator of Travesias this year. So like these trips are also like very productive for a platform such as Terremoto in order for us to have visibility. So it's an exchange. They give us visibility, and they give us a network as well of people that is there. But I also felt that I needed to be honest. So what I focused my review on was like trying to mention like the good things and the bad things about the biennial, but I also tried to be very argumentative. Like I really wanted to explain why I felt that or why I think that, because I mean, these reviews are opinions at the end of the day. And I don't think I got the biennial upset, hopefully. I don't think it was super harsh because 2 weeks later, Art Informado published its review, and it was pretty harsh. So I tried to negotiate between how I can be constructive as well in my criticism, and how my works could be also useful for that community, and not only the biennial, but the artistic community itself in the local scene. So I was talking to a couple of curators, like, what did you think of my review? Was it useful? And people was like, yeah, I think the way you made certain questions was very useful for us to even question the role of the País Biennale. I mean, some of other reviews I've read that are more like, how do you say complaciente?
Pleasant, like
More pleasant, pleasing, more pleasing. But I mean, I think you have to navigate like between what you want to say, what your media stands for, what are your institutional alliances, but also like, don't deny that we also get something from it. So I don't know. I think it's like, I think all institutional relations are like, this power game in which you get, I don't know. I think it's very complex as well.
And I think there's something to going back to this kind of idea of regionalism. I just wrote a somewhat negative review also of the Made in LA, which is the biennial that happens every 2 years in Los Angeles. But I live in LA. I know these artists. I know these curators. I know this institution really well. I feel very comfortable having an informed opinion about this particular moment in LA, right? Whereas somewhere like Guatemala or Mexico or Argentina or even Brazil, places that I travel to often, but it is not my home place. I have to think much more carefully about my voice in that context, right? And who is listening to my voice as an American editor in relation to these communities, because I show up for a little bit of time and I don't know the dynamics at play there. So I think it's something to really think about regionalism too, and trying to think of the best, also trying to think of who are the best people to write these things, who is embedded there, who knows the scene when possible. There are times when it's not possible.
Yeah. Maybe like, I don't know, just standing from what you're saying and relating it also to Latin American practices and Latin American visibility. We know that interest in Latin American art has grown exponentially during the last decade, probably a couple of decades. Yet coverage often revolves around major events or spectacles such as Sonamaco, Bienal de Sao Paulo, I don't know. So how we as a media avoid turning the region into a series of moments or for a global audience? Like, are we actually talking to the local community embedded in that specific event, or are we talking to a global audience, like replicating certain how can I put it, like certain practices that are based on extractivism as well? How do we avoid reproducing these extractivistic dynamics when we cover these major events and when we talk about Latin American art?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think it's tough. So like I can speak sort of for the Art Newspaper. We are like an art world publication. So like on some level, we are talking to the people who travel around to art fairs and biennials. Like, I think we sort of, I wouldn't say that we like represent that group, but that's sort of like who our audience is. And so partly by necessity and partly just by the nature of who we're talking to, a lot of our coverage of not just Latin America, honestly, this applies to, Europe and North America too. Like a lot of our coverage is tied to major art industry moments. But I think this is also where having like a really strong network of local writers saves us. The fact that we have writers here in Mexico City, in Sao Paulo, in Buenos Aires, who are on the ground, day in and day out, and they can tell us, there's something important happening here. It has nothing to do with a major global art fair or a major international gallery, but like you should be writing about this. And that's where, trusting our local correspondents is really, I think, like honestly, saves us a lot of grief.
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer this with a little bit of an anecdote, which is that, I spent many years of my life in Miami, during the 2000s. And that living there, being an art, I was a magazine editor at that time, and having the specter of Art Basel come every December was a blessing and a curse. And I imagine that Sonamaco is the same, and SP Art is the same, and all these events work in a way where it's a devil and an angel. It's a blessing and a curse. You get all this attention at this moment, but it leaves so much of what happens at museums, at galleries, in artist studios throughout the rest of the year with nowhere to express what they do. No attention. No one's going to see it. And that was so frustrating for me, being in that city and being an editor and feeling like we had to have this sort of giant curve of coverage, right? Or giant curve up at this moment when we could be doing this all year. So it really is an extractive process in that way that there's a heat that happens at a moment. We're trying to get that heat, right? And I feel it so acutely this week in Mexico City. I was just telling Helena, like, the exhibitions that people are talking about around, and when I say people, I see people from Los Angeles that I've talked about, people from New York, are not the exhibitions that are even the best ones, right? They're the ones that have the great parties. They're the ones that have the money behind them. But there are amazing exhibitions happening, like the ones at Museo del Chopo, that maybe don't have the press and don't have the PR, international PR to bring people there, but are doing the work year round, right? So that's the problem. The solution is one that has problems too, which are about capacity. You know, like the local publications are the ones that we have to look to and be so thankful of, that they're doing that coverage year round, right? To have magazines and to support magazines, to support writers that are local, that are doing it year round, that are doing it every month. In LA, we have things like Carla, we have Matt Stromberg at Hyperallergic, who writes constantly, every other day, coming out with what should be seen, what is happening. And I'm so thankful, because I know that I can only publish 5 or 6 reviews, even in LA, which is a huge art market with so much money behind it, but I could publish 200. You know, I could publish 200 a year if I had the capacity. And there's writers to do it, and there's interest, and there's good art, like in any city, right? Any city with the good art schools and an art economy. But we just, we have to make choices about what we can cover. And we have to defer our expertise and our ability to magazines like Terremoto and like Art Nexus for a long time. I was so happy, Art Asia Pacific, all these regional magazines that are doing as critical, as good writing as we are year round.
Yeah. I mean, I think the question is again the same. Like, how do you remain independent with your opinions, with the selection, with your choices, but also how do you survive, and how do you remunerate your writers fair enough? I believe that Terremoto is at least one of the very few magazines in Mexico that pays their writers. We don't pay a lot, but we pay as much as we can.
We don't pay a lot either,
and that's terrible, right? Like, how much, like, let's talk numbers. How much do you pay for, like, let's say a 2,000 word essay?
For anything, okay, so like a 200, let's say a 700 word review, which is our back of book regular review. That's the way that we're going to cover things most of the time. And those are $250. We pay $250 for those. And those are so much work for the writer. They are so much work. We are nothing. I'm thankful. I give thanks every day that we throw peanuts at these writers and they turn around such amazing texts. Like, it is an incredible thing that they do for the love of art, as we say, por el amor al arte. Literally. But for something like a 2,000 word, it can be anywhere between, for web, it's one figure, like $900, but it could be upwards up to $1,500 or 2,000, which is something that, we just recently raised our prices because, as we all know, the price of living is extremely expensive. But at the same time, it's incredibly expensive to publish a magazine 10 times a year, have ongoing coverage all the time, and feel like you're doing the writers any bit of justice, like any bit of feeling like you're providing them with, like, you cannot afford to write full time in Los Angeles at the rates we pay, and I know every other organization, and live a decent life. You have to be doing other things. So who am I to say you can't be traveling, you can't take commissions, you can't write about an artist? Who am I to tell them that they can't do these things? and still try to make a life. We used to have a policy, you couldn't be this kind of person, you couldn't work for these things and write for the magazine. And I feel very sort of like, how am I going to say what you're going to make a living? As long as I know that I know you personally and you're ethical. And I know that we've had a conversation saying like, you can't write about this artist for Gagosian Quarterly and then write about it for us. You know what I mean? And I trust my writers. I trust this community that I've built around me to make those decisions. Right. But yeah, we pay. I mean, it's even for us as we're the Artforum. We have offices on Fifth Avenue and blah blah blah. The situation is not good. Like we are affected by the art market and galleries not putting ads in, and as we all are. And it's a shrinking market. The Wall Street Journal the Washington Post just got rid of two out of three of their art critics. I mean, this is a shrinking market. This is not as lucrative. We are the lucrative ones within the non-lucrative world, but it is an incredibly tough thing to feel that responsibility.
What about our newspaper?
So we don't really publish 2,000 word essays. Our sort of length of article tops out around like 1,600 words, and those are features. Most of our articles, honestly, are in the like 500 to 800 word range, like because it's so news focused. It's both a blessing and a curse, but it means we can keep articles quite short. But our pay rate sort of depends on like this kind of seniority and profile of the writer, but it goes anywhere. The very bottom is 50 cents a word, so we're per word. So it goes from 50 cents a word at the low end to there are a couple very high profile writers who get $1 a word, and that's. So, a news article could pay a writer anywhere between like $250 up to, if it's quite long, like $1,000. I think in the time that I've been at the Art Newspaper, we have never not been losing money. So the economics of it aren't great, but this is where, benevolent owners are also a blessing and a curse, but can kind of.
Yeah, no, but I think like this is the first question we need to ask when we want to talk about not replicating extractivist dynamics within the editorial work. Like, do we pay our writers? How much do we pay? What type of care do we take of them?
It sounds cursi, but like we are nothing without the writers. The magazine does not exist. It is not a thing without the writers. It's a shell.
But also the question is about the readers. Like, who is reading nowadays a 2,000 essay on a biennial, for instance? And I think it's very complex that as well. Like in this age in which the content comes so fast and goes so fast, and you have to keep up on nothing too much about something. You just know very little about many things. Like it's really hard to create deep articles to foster critical thinking, and I think that at least in Terremoto, that's what we advocate for, in the sense that we try to navigate as best as we can the fact that there are so many events going on that maybe we won't be able to cover them all, but that if we cover them, it will probably be a long essay, and that we will probably won't be talking about Sonamaco tomorrow, because it is impossible to write a 2,000 essay on Sonamaco in 2 days. I think there's also this acceleration, in how do we write and how magazines are perceived. Like you have to keep up with everything that's happening all the time, and you have to be on top of the content and on top of the countries and on top of the best artists. And I think that's how do we do that when we barely are selling advertising, or we're fundraising? At least in Terremoto, we're fundraise a lot to cover our own salaries and to pay the writers and to do a residency program and to publish a book, and we stopped doing print because we couldn't do it any longer. So it's so many things that we have to to take into account, but also you have to be to have good standards and to have to be moral, and so it's this navigation between the personal, the institutional, the politics of imagination, but the politics of critical thinking. I don't know, it's just
And I think, I mean, one of the things that we say at Artforum is that we're not trying to be the first voice. We're trying to be the last voice and the authoritative voice. So often there's a huge temporal gap between when the show happened and when the review comes out, or when the article comes out, or the 2,000 word. It might be a show that happened 2 years ago. Those are not the timeframes that work for the market, right? Those are timeframes that work for academia. They work for scholarship, and we try to do that. But it's very difficult to be that place, like, and also not be like other magazines that are coming out with 10,000 every single thing that happened, every dinner. You know, that's where the advertising dollars are. You know, that the advertising dollars are in what can happen in the next 20 minutes, what can happen in the next 3 days. We have a policy now where when we try to write web articles, like if I were to write a web article about this week, that it would come out within a week, which means that I have to be here, go home, and within a day or two write 1,500 words, right? Which is, how am I going to do that critically? How am I going to think about this expansively? Think about art history. Think about the politics of not only their own place, but my own personal politics in relation to this. And that's as fast as we get. Artforum, 10 days, that's as fast as we get. We cannot go faster than that. But there are other magazines, not to like, you know, cultured, things like this that are much better equipped to do things very quickly, you know, but that's,
or that just reply press releases, which is, you know, another format.
Like, no shade. You got to do that if you're going to write something in 2 days. But I think it's just the model that Artforum has, or that we try to have, of critical scholarship is very difficult to square with the world as it is right now. But also what keeps us going is knowing that the artists, the curators, the academics are looking to us for that content and nowhere else. I just saw John Waters 10 days ago in San Francisco, and he stopped writing for us a few years ago. But he said, I don't want to write for you guys, but I know how important it is. And I read every issue because it's the only place that's happening still. It's one of the few places that critical writing that's distributed 10 times a year is available around the country and around the world. I mean, it's very, one thing, the other thing I would say is that it's very difficult to get Artforum outside of the United States and Europe. Extremely difficult. You can read it online, but case in point, there's an empty booth right there that should have our magazines in it that doesn't. So it is not, distribution is a real thing too, you know? Anyway, I think we've been on for almost an hour, so.
I mean, do you want to reply and then we open to the public?
Sure, I can just briefly say that we're kind of the opposite. You know, if we're 2 days behind on something, we're probably going to skip it, honestly. Like, we are like a newspaper about art. So we very much have that like old school journalist kind of DNA. You know, what Bryan just described specifically not doing is what I was doing 2 nights ago, 1:30 in the morning, was finishing my write-up of Sonamaco. Like, that's just like what we do. So we're just constantly trying to keep up with the news, which is a completely different timeline, but I imagine equally frustrating, because we have finite resources, both of people and of money, and there's, you know, our world is enormous now. There's also like all this money pouring into it that didn't used to be there. So it's just the dynamics are much more complicated and much broader than they have been historically. And there's constantly more than we can cover. So it's like a treadmill we can't get off.
So should we open to the public? Like, if alguien tiene alguna pregunta, alguien quiere comentar algo.
Hi, I first of all wanted to acknowledge how nice it is to be part of this panel and listen to you guys talk. Like, my inner art historian is screaming inside from being starstruck by being in front of you. It's a bit of a question, but also like an acknowledgement. I also have to say that it's so nice to rely on you guys to print stuff when the whole world feels like it's falling apart. And I know it from like institutional event production, how hard it is to be producing all the time, constantly be having events, and for you guys having articles and things coming out and always having an opinion and a review and everything. So I kind of wanted to ask, how do you all keep motivated with the difficult times? And yeah, mostly that. Like, how do you keep motivated? How do you keep on wanting to write about art, which sometimes, at least for me as a writer, art historian and everything, like, it becomes a bit hard to be focused on art because it feels ephemeral. Yeah, I didn't formulate it well, but I hope you understand the question.
Go ahead. Want
Okay, then I'm gonna start. So I've been director of Terremoto for the last 3 years, and when I was offered this position, I didn't even think about it because for me it was an actual chance to contribute to one of the main organizations in Latin American thinking. So I think that's what keeps me motivated. And I think all the team is, it's not only me. Like, we are very excited, like asking ourselves every day what type of institution we want to build, what type of institution we want to be a part of. And yes, of course, half of the work is fundraising and Excel sheets and like stupid meetings or like, but it's okay because we also have this creative space in which we can do a residency in the Dominican Republic and dance together, you know? So like, I feel that Terremoto, and the other day we were discussing this, it's like some sort of blanket that covers our practices. And it works both ways because it can limit you in a way that there are institutional limits, but you can also move those limits and like, you know, help build the art history of the present, help building the institution you want to be a part of and you want to become. And I think it's part of our generation as well. And me as a sort of youngish director to amend some of the practices that we didn't like from previous generations. So I think that's what keeps me motivated.
I think that one of the things Helena said was about creativity. I feel very lucky to have the job that I do because I get to follow my interests, right? And that is something that is so unique, right? Like if I think something is interesting, I get to write about it, I get to go, I get to see, I get to find other writers who are interested in it. And that's so unique. And that to find other people who are interested in what you are is like a blessing. So that's part of it. The other part of it is it more political in terms of the political aspect is, you know, how do you deal with these things when the world is falling apart, when the industry is falling apart? I think that in the United States, we like to say things are unprecedented all the time. Everything that's happening is unprecedented. This has never happened before. But the reality is if you look through art history, it might have not been happening exactly like this, but an artist responded to something like this. I think there's such a strong desire for artists, for our magazine to respond to what's happening in 2026 vis-a-vis Trump, vis-a-vis conservatism, vis-a-vis fascism, right? But the reality is that I looked to Argentina in 1968 to figure out how to deal with fascism. I looked to Brazil, right? Because those things happen there. So they're not unprecedented. They're unprecedented in the United States, but artists have been thinking about this and responding to this for a long time, for many, many years back, you know, up until even in the 17th century. So I don't look to artists now to respond to, that's not what keeps me going. That's not what I look to them to do. I look to the past. I'm an art historian. I think that part of the role of Artforum is that to give art historians a platform and to say like, you know, we were looking at the problem of censorship, you know, that happened in the United States or that continues to happen in the United States over the last few years. I said, well, let's do an article about, again, let's look at the NEA4 again. Let's look at the 90s. Let's look at Mapplethorpe. Let's look about how artists dealt with this 30 years ago to think about what are the strategies, what are the ways of writing, what are the ways of making art that can lead us through, right? And they might not lead us through. They might not provide you with a kind of, okay, I feel better about this. But at least I can feel better that I'm informed about it and that I understand and that I can confront historical or you know, unprecedented historical events with some sort of precedent.
I have two answers to the motivation question. One is sort of more for the publication as a whole. I would say, you know, it does feel like the world is falling apart, especially in New York, and I guess probably in London as well. And I think for us, like part of what keeps us going and keeps us doing the coverage that we do is because it feels like the press is one of the things that is being pulled apart. And it's sort of incumbent on us to keep doing what we do. Like on some level, people are trying to rewrite history, trying to question reality. Having a record of reality in our publication feels not just important in terms of like hitting traffic numbers or like covering X art fair. Like it also feels important to just be recording reality as it's kind of slipping away. So I'd say that's kind of like the bigger, sort of loftier motivation. For me personally, it's also about like just supporting artists. Like artists are out there making work, and I'm not trying to say that like I'm some sort of savior, but like I often find myself, okay, I'll give you an example. So a year and a half ago, I went to see the New Orleans Triennial, possibly the very last one, called Prospect New Orleans. And I went to see it like the week it opened, and I had like all these notes and all these photographs, and I really wanted to write about it, and I just did not have the time. And it came down to the week before it closed, and I was like, am I going to force myself to write this and like stay up late 3 nights to write this article, or do I just let it go? And it felt like, there were many reasons, but one of the reasons I ended up pulling several late nights to write this review was because all these artists put all this work into creating what was like not a perfect exhibition, but a really interesting exhibition at times. And it felt important to me to put a spotlight on them, whatever spotlight I have. So that's sort of what keeps me motivated when all the other things are going wrong, is like, I want to be able to give artists who deserve attention, the attention that whatever small bit of attention I command.
Yeah, I think.
Well, since I don't think we have any more time, but thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Please be sure to follow our work, to read our content, since we also depend on readers to support what we're doing. So thank you, both of you, and thanks everyone for coming.
See?